In this video, we're going to demonstrate how you can use a grid component in a desktop application and how you can automatically close the grid component when the user saves a record in the grid. So you can see over here we're displaying a form in a desktop application. You can see here we have our Forms tab in the control panel. Double click on that, and then I have a button over here which is using Action Scripting to open up an Xdialog window, and inside the Xdialog window we're showing a grid component. And then what I'd like to do is let the user make edits in this grid component. So for example, we can go there and change that title to owner. And then when the user submits this grid, if there are no errors, I would like to just close this window down. So let's click the submit button there, and you can see that because there were no errors, the window got closed down. So we're going to discuss now how this was achieved. So first let's go and look at what this button does over there. So we'll put our form into design mode, and then we'll just make that a little bit bigger. And if we look here, we can see that that button is using Action Scripting to open a grid component. And if we look at the definition of this action, you can see we're opening a grid component called GridinX Dialog. We've set the window type to be modal, and we've set the window size to be 50 units high and 200 units wide. So that's how we got the Xdialog open in the first place to display the grid component. So now let's go and look inside that grid component how we got it to close automatically. So let's save this now, and now switch over to the grid component. So we can see here we have our grid component, and what you'll see here is first I've got a button over here where we did the testing. So I'm going to go and take a look at this button, the code behind this button. So let's connect there, and then go to Fields, and then go to this button, and then look at the JavaScript. So what you can see here in the JavaScript is it's actually quite simple, although it looks a little intimidating here. Basically these lines over here are simply creating a JavaScript string that contains XBasic code. So we create a JavaScript array, and then we start pushing items onto the array, and then finally we join the array into a single string, putting a semicolon between each line, because multiple XBasic commands can be separated if they're on the same line with a semicolon. So what this XBasic code does is it defines an XBasic variable called dialog test, and then it uses the XBasic function called UIDLG query, passing in an argument of dialog, to get a list of all of the Xdialogs that are currently open, to get the title of all of the dialogs that are currently open. And then it filters that list looking for any item in the list that starts with grid component in Xdialog, because that's going to be the name of the dialog of the Xdialog window that contains our grid component. So once we've done this filter string, we now know what the name is of the Xdialog window that we'd like to close, and then finally we call the Xdialog command called UI_DLG close, and pass in the name of the title of the window that we would like to close. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion right now of how we close the Xdialog that houses the grid component. So after we've added this item, this command to this JavaScript array, UI_DLG close, we then do a join to get everything here into a string that is a semicolon delimited, and then we call this JavaScript function. Now this JavaScript function, generic XBasic UI from working preview, is present automatically in every single grid and dialog component, and it's how you can call generic XBasic from a JavaScript event in the Dialog or Grid component. So we just then go now and call our generic UI from working preview JavaScript function and pass in the name of the XBasic that we would like to execute. So let's go ahead now and then save this. But what I'm going to actually do is put in a debug 1 here so we can actually see it executing. So let's go ahead now and save it and go back to the control panel now. And run our code, click this button, and now we're going to just go ahead and click this button over here. So we hit the debugger, and now you can see there's all the code that we passed into this function to execute. And let's go there and now put in DLG title so we can see as we execute each line of code here. So you can see there's all of the Xdialog titles of all of the open Xdialogs right now, and we can see that one of the open Xdialogs there is called Grid Component in Xdialog. So we're now going to filter that list. So now we just have that list, that single dialog title, and then we're going to pass that into the UI modeless DLG close function, which is going to go ahead now and actually close the dialog. So you can see now the pop-up Xdialog has been closed. So now let's go back to the grid component. So we'll go back to the on-click here. We'll get rid of this debug 1 over there. And now what you can see next is we've taken the code from this on-click event over here and we've put it inside a JavaScript function. So we've created our own JavaScript function here called close Xdialog with that code in it, and then we're going to call the close Xdialog function if there were no errors after the user did a submit. So now we go to our client-side events and we can see that after grid submit we're saying that if there were no errors, in other words if e.hasErrors equals false, then call close Xdialog, and we do the exact same thing for after row submit, and there we call the close Xdialog method. So in this particular case we've shown how a button on the grid component can execute XBasic commands when the button is clicked. And in this particular case we showed how it can execute XBasic commands to close the Xdialog window in which the grid component was contained. But in fact this technique can be used to call arbitrary XBasic from buttons on the grid component or the dialog component and respond to those button clicks with XBasic. And the technique is very simple because all that you need to actually do is call this function called generic XBasic UI from working preview and pass into it any XBasic code that you'd like to execute. I hope you found this interesting. Thanks very much for watching.